Welcome everybody to La Revista Binacional. I am your host, Carlos Antonio Flores, otherwise known as Flo. I'm actually joined here today by a very special guest of mine. You guys are in for a real treat today. You guys are going to get a lot of knowledge. I promise you, I guarantee you will, and you're going to feel a lot smarter. That's what I promise. And if you don't, that's on you. Don't put it on us. This is going to be a high quality conversation and you're going to learn quite a bit. So today we're going to be talking about finances. And I know finances could be pretty scary to a lot of us out there because sometimes we don't understand them. So if we don't understand something, we tend to walk away from it or avoid it. But my special guest here today is Nancy Burgandine. Did I say that correct?
You said it correct.
All right, good. So Nancy and I have known each other for over a decade. Just a disclosure, Nancy and I have worked together in the past. She has helped me a lot when it comes to just learning about business principles, when it comes to certain situations, when it comes to taxes and how to structure things, and has been a great wealth of knowledge for myself, but not just myself, my employees as well. She has come over and helped them and educate them in creating plans of how to fix your credit score, how to save for certain life goals that you have, and I know everybody gets a lot from that. So as we get started, I want to make sure we give a shout out to our sponsors for this podcast. Our sponsor is New Journey Real Estate. So make sure you check out New Journey Real Estate. They're our good friends, and if you're looking to buy, sell property in California, and in addition to, if you're looking to invest in Mexico, New Journey Real Estate has agents over there as well that can hold you by the hand, and help you out. So check out New Journey Real Estate. So Nancy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you again.
Yes, it's been a while since we've seen each other.
Yeah.
So I know that you're moving, you got a lot of things going on your personal life and whatnot. Taxes are expensive in California, as we all know. So a lot of people are moving to different states. Texas in particular, I believe, is where you're moving to, correct?
Yes. It has no state tax.
That's why you're going there?
That's part of the reason. Money goes further. Houses are cheaper.
Yeah, no, it makes logical sense. I know there's been a big increase. I think Texas, Colorado, and Idaho have been the beneficiaries of Californians moving out there, if I'm not mistaken. They may not see it that way, but but yeah, I think those are like the three leading states with people moving. So Nancy, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your professional background, because obviously I know you, but maybe some of the people that are listening to us do not. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your professional background.
Okay, so I think I consider myself a serial entrepreneur. I've owned 5 different businesses. I've owned retail businesses. I owned a consulting business, I owned a manufacturing business, and I owned part of a restaurant.
Wow.
So when I started consulting after my business was sold to a public company, I really had a broad background to draw my consulting on, because all of my businesses were grown successfully.
So which business did you enjoy the most and which one did you enjoy the least?
I am not a retail person. I do not do good with complaining customers. Luckily, in my computer store, I was able to find some phenomenal young salespeople that were able to deal with them. I really liked the manufacturing business because I dealt with high-end corporate customers, and I dealt with musicians that really appreciated what we provided for them,
Oh, really?
and therefore were willing to pay for it. And if they wanted something in a hurry, they just came out and said, okay, we're going to have a courier pick it up. We'll pay the overtime.
Oh, wow. So out of all those businesses, which one do you enjoy? You said retail, I believe, right? The one you enjoyed the least?
Yes.
And that's because it was more dynamic with customer interaction, or?
Right. I always had to have a smile on in front of the customer instead of dealing with business-to-business people, which is what I dealt with in my manufacturing business. So even if I had to have a smile on, I found business-to-business people were much easier to deal with than the customer wanting the cheapest computer but all of the biggest features.
Yeah, of course. Well, they come in with a beer budget with champagne taste.
Right.
So yeah, that doesn't tend to work. So any advice for anybody that's looking to start a business or anything in that realm that you can just, a little bit nuggets of information and wisdom?
Well, one thing I'm going to say is my first 2 businesses, I still had a full-time job.
Okay.
I knew that I had money coming in. so I could invest in the business. I could make smart business decisions. I didn't have to worry about paying my rent. And yes, it's hard. I mean, I worked every Saturday and 2 nights a week in the business, and during Christmas time, 7 nights a week in the store. And the same with my consulting business. It was every weekend we were gone, but a little hard work for a few years reaps the benefits and allows you to succeed later on.
No, that makes a lot of sense now. When we first met, I know that you gave my old business partner and I a lot of business advice. It wasn't just taxes and this and that. It was just in general, even management advice, actually. So now I see where it comes from your years of experience in these different industries. And I know that I'm not the only person that benefited from that. I know there's other people that you've helped along the way as well. So how did this lead you to write a book?
So I've always wanted to write the book, and especially as I started raising my son, he was raised like I was raised. Cash in his hand, he paid for things as a kid, he was very money aware, and I'll talk about it later, some of the stories in my book. Most of his peers had no sense. They had no sense of money. It didn't matter their demographics. It didn't matter if they were kids of doctors or low-income kids. It just was, they only saw their parents with a credit card. They didn't understand delayed gratification. They didn't understand the decisions. One big story is, every kid had Razor as a brand of a scooter when my son was young. Okay. He wanted a Razor scooter, but he had to pay 20% of it. We went to Walmart. He looked at the scooter there at half the price, and it looked just as good. He had the $10 to pay for his part of it. He didn't have the $20 for the Razor. He became very happy with a Walmart scooter. Never fussed about it, loved it. It lasted as long.
I think that experience right there kind of gave him a sense of responsibility when it's coming, I'm assuming, out of his pocket. Like, wait a minute, do I want to spend my entire, let's just call it allowance on this?
Right.
Or do I, keep some of it and go with a more, call it generic brand, but it got more use or more or right. Equal enjoyment?
Right. That's exactly right.
How old was he at that time?
He was 5.
Okay, so he was 5. So what age do you believe that kids become aware of money, or at least how it works?
So becoming aware of exactly money is a very interesting thing. They first become aware of an activity gets them something. A chore gets you the ability to do something else. And I have a story of a little 2-year-old who started, and by 4 she was very aware of money. Okay, and basically she had a single mom, worked it in and out, couldn't really afford toys, but mom loved to recycle. At 2, Alexa started recycling with her and got half the money. And that was used to buy toys or even ice cream, treats. There was no money in the budget for anything fun. And she was about 4 when she wanted a toy, and it was $10. And she didn't know what $10 was, but every time they basically counted the money out of her jar. And she said to her mother, "Mom, this toy isn't worth half a jar." She didn't know it was worth $10, but she knew it would take her 3 months to fill the jar back up again. So therefore, she knew at 4 years old how much work it took to buy the toy. It was later on that she recognized money, probably more like 5 or 6, that it's 50 cents I get from this, and I need 10 of these to get something.
So if I understand correctly, they can start understanding, like, not necessarily money, but maybe currency, like, or bartering, or how would you say?
I call it work equals achieving something. You have to do something, which is how you earn money, right? You don't just have money coming out of the sky or from trees.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't born with money like that. I had to work for everything I had.
So you have to work for your money. And so you're working for things first, because they don't really understand that translation to dollars. But they do understand that if I want to buy an ice cream, I have to do these 3 chores to earn enough money for an ice cream or whatever else they want. And they can learn that at 2 or 3 years old.
Wow. So even at a young age, they can start picking it up. And then I guess the actual money they can start getting 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, if you start at 2, at 4 and 5, they start really understanding money and the concept of money.
Yeah, I have 3 young children right now, and I think what I try teaching them at the young age is responsibilities and how to,
And also, these kids can grow up to have no value of money, and all of a sudden they are on their own and they can't make it. I mean, and that's at 22 or 23 or 24, but it's another topic. I can tell you the story of kids in college that have absolutely no concept of budgeting and run out of money every week.
Do you think that's more of a generational thing that's happening now, or that's something that just because of the age and the bracket that the kids are in?
I think part of it is due to the credit card situation, that parents are paying by credit card. The kids are not seeing money. And I think it's just a part of the philosophy. I don't think it's generational. My parents were unique. Most of my peers had similar problems. But my parents were very unique in talking about money at the dining room table for before we could understand what they were talking about, and including us in decisions. And I had other friends like that. It may have been cultural in my community, but as I moved out of that community, most of my other friends had no concept of it.
I'm trying to think, where do we start and where do we break a cycle? So, for example, I grew up not knowing anything about money. We didn't have money growing up. We're actually pretty extremely poor, but I knew responsibility. And I knew that if I wanted things, I needed to work for them. That I was able to learn that. Later on, I started learning more about money. I started, accumulating a little bit. So I started making sure I knew what to do with it, and whether it was investing or whatnot, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit.
So,
but how do we, if we don't know anything about money, how do we teach our kids about money? That's where I think a lot of people may struggle.
Right. So I think learning responsibility is a good start. But that's why we wrote the book, Raising Financially Independent Children. And it's full of stories and examples of how you can teach your kids about money.
So if I don't have an MBA or a financial background, I can understand pretty much if I read this book?
It's written to be understood by somebody working in fast food. We have people in that environment reading the book. One of the story I told you is somebody I know, she read the book. She gave it to some of her friends. She understood it. We also have people with MBAs that have learned a lot from the book. So because it's story-based and it gives you an example, it doesn't just tell you, here, this is what to do. It says these are 3 situations that you can do. And you can modify something based on what values you want to teach your children. I don't say you have to give your child an allowance. I say you have to find a way to let your child earn money to buy things. So it could be an allowance. You could pay them for chores. You could tell them they have to be paid for grades. You can choose the way that fits your family values, and that's how the book talks about, because not every family has the same values. For one family, doing the chores on time is very important. For another family, it may be getting at least 3 A's on a report card is important. And so you can use that to motivate your child to allow him to get what he wants, or she.
That makes sense. So you got to have, obviously, like incentives. We're all incentive-based. So you got to just be able to at least identify those, is what you're saying.
Right.
And be able to work with your child in that.
Right. But you need to fill out what your values are, because there is no one set of values. So you value responsibility first. So you're going to maybe ask your children, they have to get all of their chores done on time before they can get their reward. Somebody else may value grades and put more emphasis on that.
Now, is there another book that maybe you recommend or that you wrote that kind of, so let's just say, how could I teach somebody if I don't know myself, or I can learn about finances maybe as an adult?
So the book actually goes into a couple of chapters on finances for an adult and how to teach your child when we're talking about raising financially. So we talk about how to go look at different stocks and how to look at it in a bit and find something your child understands, and maybe at 7 buy a share of Disney or McDonald's. But yes, we have 3 books that are aimed at adults. One is Financial Essentials, and that has no stories. It's a little drier. It's for the person that just wants to learn about finance and read it. And then we've written 2 books aimed at specific markets. One is at couples, and it really talks about the interdependency of how couples can come up to finance. So it starts teaching about how your risk tolerance can be different, How do you meld it? What do you do to have a budget that everybody's happy with, and goes into more detail? And then we've just come out with one aimed at women, because in today's society still women have a lot less exposure to money. I think I found a statistic that over 75% of the married households still today the men pay the bills. It changes. There are households where where it's not that way, but it's still the way women are growing up. So they have more hurdles to go over than most men.
So you think that's more because people are intimidated by money, or is just something that maybe they don't want to learn about, or what do you think that comes from?
I think some of it's cultural. I have a client whose husband was very, very, very risky with their money. And when they lost all the money, the wife finally called me. And I wanted to educate her. And all she wanted was to find somebody that would take care of her money safely. She had never learned about money. It's not a woman's role to do money, but I just need to find somebody. She's a nurse. She's highly educated, but she was afraid to learn at 50 years old. So I think it's a fear of making a mistake, and it's a lack of a role model. I think it's a big lack of a role model in dealing with money, because in a lot of cultures, it belongs to one person.
I 100% agree. Yeah, and that's part of the reason why I invited you to this podcast, because I feel that we're going to be able to help people. Remember, as I mentioned, that we're going to teach you guys. You're going to learn something from this. So this is like a note that I'm saying is you're learning something really important right now, is being able to get uncomfortable with being comfortable with being uncomfortable. So I feel like many times, not just from a finance perspective, but in general, if something makes us uncomfortable, we tend to avoid it because it's not something that we feel we want to be in. But I believe when it comes to this particular about finances, it could maybe seem intimidating, but once you start looking at, it's really just plus and minuses, stuff that we learn in grade school. At least my point of view. I'm not sure how you view that.
And now, today, not 20 years ago, there are so many free resources. So one of the things I preach, and I am proud to say that all but one of my 22-year-old son's friends had a Roth IRA before the age of 18. And you can open a Roth IRA with $50 or $25 at a lot of low-cost brokerage firms. You can go in there. They'll give you something called a risk tolerance profile to answer. It's just a bunch of questions. How would you feel if this happened? What would you like to do? How long do you want the money to stay? And they will help you pick investments. And they will show you podcasts to learn. So in addition to the book, there are free resources out there. Whether it's a brokerage firm, whether it's a website, there are places there to learn. And if you start with just a little, I never ever preach putting all your money in at once. If you start with a little and you put $25 a month into something like a Roth IRA account, which we can talk about what that is later on.
Thank you. I'm actually taking a note to bring that up, because I'm glad that you mentioned the Roth, because a lot of people, their listeners may not know or heard or don't quite understand it. And as statistics that I've seen, and unfortunately, in particular with the Hispanic community, only I believe 29% of households here in the U.S. participate in the stock market. So I believe that's a very unfortunate statistics that I would like to see people increase, because you're missing out. Because many times when I believe Hispanics think about investing, they think about either buying a house or starting a business.
Right.
When there's so many more opportunities. And that's why if you could probably help our audience understand what are some of those opportunities when it comes to 401ks, IRAs, and different, and how do they affect?
So let's start with even buying a house in a 401k. Okay? So first of all, somewhere over 90% of the companies match part of your 401k. So a 401k is an investment account for retirement. You are penalized if you take it out, except for certain reasons, before 59 and a half. It's your money, you can take it out, but since you put it in tax-free, you're going to pay a penalty to take it out early. So, but if you put $5 in Your boss may be putting $5 in, so you're getting a raise. Or typically, if you put up to 4% in, your company is matching that 4%, so now you're making 4% more. One of the biggest uses of a 401k, if you start early, is to borrow from yourself for a down payment on a house. When I had my manufacturing company, I had a young lady who was an assembler do that. After she bought her house, everybody in manufacturing increased their contributions because they saw how her 4 years of consistently putting in 1% more each year gave her her down payment on the house. And she paid the money back to herself. But it really allowed her to go out and buy a house.
So she, if I understand correctly, she was able to, from her own wages, save on taxes.
Right.
Because I'm assuming, tax deferred.
Right.
And then at that point, so that means she was able to get more out of that dollar that she was going to make, and then I wouldn't say more, but use more of it, and then use that money as a down payment for her house, and then just paid back her own loan.
Well, it was better than that. For every dollar she put in, the company put $1 in. So she could only borrow 50% of her balance because that's a 401k loan. But if she put $10,000 in, then the company put $10,000 in, and it grew. So basically the company financed half of her down payment.
So how does somebody get more information on that?
If a company has a 401k plan, they have a plan advisor attached to that plan. And just like I used to come into CDC
Correct.
to talk to the people, today's world, it may be a Zoom call. So you can go to your HR department or whoever does your payroll, get the phone number or the web address of the person, and you can just have a Zoom call or a phone call or however that person wants to meet with you, and they will help you set up the plan, and they will help you figure out how you want to invest. Now, you need to ask. It is not a requirement that a plan offers a loan. I think it's offered by over 99% of the plans. But a company can set their own rules on a plan. They could offer certain benefits, such as loans.
So on that note, I guess two questions. First one would be, what if my company doesn't have a 401k? What could I do?
So if you work for a company, then you can open what's called an individual retirement account, an IRA. And we didn't talk about this in 401k land, but we talk about it as for both. You can open a traditional IRA or a traditional 401k where you save on taxes. You put $500 in a year, you pay taxes on $500 less income, you pay tax when it comes out. You can open a Roth IRA, which I mentioned before, for these 16-year-olds that aren't paying taxes. There, you don't get a tax break. But when you take the money out, you don't pay tax on the money or the growth. The other thing with a Roth account is you can't take the growth out. But let's say you put $10,000 in and it's worth $20,000 15 years later. After 5 years, you could actually, if you had an emergency, take the $10,000 out. We don't recommend it. You want to grow the money so that you can retire, so that you're not like 50% of the people in California that the only way they retired is they happen to bought a house and they sell it and they move to Tucson or Texas or someplace where they know nobody and buy a very small, cheap house so that they can live.
So another question that I hear a lot, and people sometimes even ask me, is how much should I contribute?
So the earlier you start, the less you need to contribute. If you're starting early, ideally you want to contribute 10%. And early, I mean below 25. But the answer is you contribute as much as you can. And one of the things that I preach to people is, even if you start with 2%, you're going to get a raise. You're a good worker. Then you give half your raise every year to your 401k. And that's what that lady did. And she was a very good worker, so she got a lot of raises. And so she got up to 10% in 5 years.
So following up on that, because obviously with Social Security, it'll be very doubtful. I'm very doubtful that I'm going to be benefiting from Social Security, at least as we know it now. So the sooner you start, the better. And in particular, as I'm thinking, something else that came to mind is college just seems to got way more expensive when I started going to school. So when I graduated over 20 years ago, I specifically remember a conversation with a professor of ours, and he just said something changed, and now I can't remember exactly what it was, but college is going to be a lot more expensive, and it just seems to have gotten more and more expensive. I know there's 529 plans. Could you help me explain what a 529 plan is and what are the benefits to that?
Yeah, so a 529 plan is a plan that you can put money away solely for college costs and in some cases for private school costs. But that varies state by state. And again, it grows tax-free based on the state you live in. And we're in California where we're recording this. California gives you no benefit. Some states give you a tax deduction for what you put in the plan. So you have to look in your state. And it grows tax-free, and when you take it out, if it goes towards college expenses, including room and board, you pay no tax on it. If you take it out and there is no college, then there's a penalty. If your kid gets a scholarship, you may pay a little tax on some of the gains. But basically, it's a tax-free way of saving and not paying tax on your growths. It also is segregated from your money, and it's not something you're going to use often. There's also another place that I'm really recommending people go for college savings, and it's actually provided by the federal government. So It's the safest place you can put money, and it's called an I-bond, and it's always paid a lot better interest than anywhere else. Today it pays 9.6% interest. You can put $10,000 per person in an I-bond, so you can actually open them in your kids' names if you want. When you do this when the child's young, the interest grows. The interest is not taxable if you use it for school. So that's a second way of growing money for school. And if you're a little concerned about investments, it's a very safe way because it's backed by the federal government. You can't touch the money for a year after you put it in, and the interest rates change. When we were in a zero inflation world, the interest rate was 4% still, where the bank was paying you 0.25%. So it's designed with a $10,000 limit because it's designed for the average person to have a place that they can do as well as the very sophisticated investor.
Nice. So you mentioned, so I don't lose the money. So in case my child doesn't go to school, I can use it for...
You can use it for whatever you want. You just have to pay the tax on all the gains. You can also move it from child to child. You can also use it for your graduate school education. You can save it if you want to for your grandchildren. Let's say you happen to be the lucky parent. I have a friend who one son went to Annapolis and the other went to USC. She's decided to keep the 529 plans until she has grandkids. And it's just going to pay for the grandkids' college. So it's going to go to the two boys for their kids. So they will have college money set up.
What about the individual that's listening to us that in their mind, they're like, it would be nice if I even had anything extra to put away to save. I can't save anything right now. I can't put anything away from college or my own retirement. I'm just getting by today. What do you say to that individual?
So we talk in our books for adults a lot about budgeting, and we talk about how to find a budget and how to find the money. And it doesn't matter if you're a very low income person just barely getting by to somebody that makes a lot of money and has big credit card debt. So it may be that it really is true, but there's a lot of help out there. One of the biggest pieces of advice, and this really worked for a lady who was a teacher's aide at a school, so fairly low income. She was short about $100 every month, and she was now at her max limit. A friend asked if I would help her. Her first homework assignment was to write down every penny she spent for 30 days. Every penny she spent. We actually found a really easy way to save that $100. She was spending $200 on McDonald's or the soda machine at work, just for soda. 2-3 sodas a day, it adds up. She bought a cooler, she bought soda at Costco, and she saved $145 a month. All of a sudden, she was no longer negative every month, she was $45 positive. Mm-hmm. She got so excited, we found other places. One of the other things we did is they always had a no cooking night. And they just ordered pizza. But it's $20 to order pizza. They started buying frozen pizza at Costco. They saved another $15 a week. And she actually started an emergency fund with putting $50 a month away.
No, so you can pretty much, I guess it's just being thoughtful where your money's going to. Knowing, I guess not even just thoughtful, just an understanding of awareness of where am I spending my money, and maybe that's where they could start from there.
I really recommend that you take the discipline and write down where every penny goes every month. I mean, and you can do things a little easier.
Would like a bank statement be able to show you that, or
if you use your debit card all the time? But she used a lot of cash. So one of the things that you can do is, let's say if your biggest cash expense is for food, you can put the cash you have for food in an envelope and take that envelope with you. You know, so whatever it is, if you can use a debit card, that's great. Just find the way. You only have to do it for 30 days. And you'll get a grasp of what could you go without to be able to reach your goal. Whether it's buying a new car, you know, or getting out of credit card debt, being able to do anything you'd like. And so it's there. I mean, there are extreme circumstances where something happens and maybe it's not there, but almost everybody can find something that is discretionary that they're willing to give up for, even if it's for a short period of time. There is another option, and this is the option I took when interest rates went up on my variable loan, where I didn't want to give up something. I went and took a second job. I went and worked in the evening, 4 evenings a week, to make up the deficit, because I didn't want to stop going out to dinner once a week. So there's 2 ways to solve it.
Yeah, you either have to make more or you have to cut.
Right.
Pretty much. There's no 2 ways about it.
And there's a third way that we don't talk about, is looking at your community colleges or places to get a little more education to get that next promotion.
To pretty much your current job, how can you essentially earn more by adding more value? Yeah, because very few employers, none that I ever met, says, hey, person, I like you, so therefore here's a raise because you're such a good person.
Right. Now, what we actually did at our company in manufacturing is we had a list of courses you could take that would get you the next promotion when the slot became available, because there were skills you needed. You know, we were doing testing and we were doing assembly. So if you learned how to solder, you were eligible for that next slot, which was $2 up. A lot of employers don't do that, but you can ask them, and they may say, yes, if you learn this skill, you'll make more money. I know a young man who's a welder, and his boss finally said, if you go take this class and get this certification, yes, you will be able to get a raise. But he had to ask. So ask your employer.
I 100% agree with that. I honestly feel like between an employer and employee relationship, it's a very symbiotic relationship. You both have to grow. You both have to learn. So it makes total sense. If you invest in yourself, you're only going to make the company stronger. So therefore, the company's going to benefit. So they will want to keep you. And if they don't, you're a much stronger value person now. Some other organization is either going to poach you away, or it will be easy for you to leave somewhere else where you're going to get paid more.
Exactly.
So it behooves you, I would say, to take that initiative and continue to invest in yourself. So yeah, no, I definitely 100% agree with that. Now, you had mentioned something earlier about couples and finances.
Right.
So can maybe talk a little bit more about that? Like, why is it so important for couples to be on the same page when it comes to finances? And I'll give you my personal 2 cents on that as well.
It makes for a more harmonious relationship. And it's okay to disagree as long as you figure out how to do it. And it could be just as simple as one person, when they eat out, wants to go for steak and lobster and wine every time, and the other person just wants to eat out as much as the budget allows. So how do you solve the difference? Well, one of the things we talk about in the book is split the budget. If you have $300 allocated to entertainment and eating out, give each person a choice on how to spend the $150. And then both of you are happy. You're no longer arguing every time you go out. But more than that, if you don't both buy into the budget, you'll never stay on the budget because the other person thinks that it's arbitrary. You say there's only $600 for groceries a month. Well, I can't do that. I'm not going to bother. And so when both people buy into it, you have a much better chance of being successful on it. And you work out the differences. You sit down and figure out, why does one person think we can eat for $600 and I think we need $1,000? You know, and it could be as simple, and this was a situation with one of my clients and the husband and wife. The kids won't eat the school meals. I have to, and one kid has allergies. So I can't just buy plain old food for them. I have to buy this and that. And so we spend that much more money. So the discussion was, where do we cut it? So that if we have, because we got to take care of the kids' allergies. Where else can we cut it? So they decided to cut eating out to keep their food and eating out budget in place. But the other person didn't understand the cost of the food for the child with the allergies.
I'm assuming once this person became aware, obviously they put their kids, obviously safety now as a priority, so they were able to adjust and take away from somewhere else?
Right.
Or cut somewhere else?
Right, they cut somewhere else. Again, they cut their eating out budget because they were eating out 2 nights a week. They cut it down to 2 times a month, and they were now in budget again.
No, being on a budget is there. I mean, I tend to relate a lot of things to business because I've been doing business for so long, and that's how my mind works now. But you can have that same mentality and apply it to your personal life, and I believe there's could be a lot of savings, particularly in the budget. I personally have a budget. That's why I believe I'm going to read this book. I read your other book, the one about the couples, and making sure I can communicate with my spouse and making sure we're on the same page when it comes to these type of matters, because it could be difficult. I believe financial stress is probably one of the key indicators for people getting divorced, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right. I think half of my friends get divorced over money, and it's just something that you can relieve, and you can put those habits onto your children. You can show them. I was blessed. My parents put us in the things. We took a week's vacation every year, and we had input as children. And I lived in New York, and we wanted to go to Disney World. And my father said, that costs twice as much as what we normally spend. He didn't say no. He said, what are we going to give up? And my sister and I looked at each other with all the things they talked about giving up, and we said, we'll pick something else. We don't want to give those things up. We don't want to give up the weekend where we go away and we meet all these kids. But they didn't say no. They said, why?
So they allow you to make a choice.
Right.
That's very interesting. I think that's very, fundamental. Is a lot of times we feel like we may not have a choice, when in actuality we do. It's just a matter of becoming aware of them and then making, I guess, a choice to do something or not to do something.
There are very few people that only bring home enough money to pay the rent and put food on the table. They're always making a choice in something, whether it's taking a drive to the country, going to a movie versus renting a movie. There's a choice, and you just have to figure out what choices you want to make.
What about to that one individual? Because I've heard it before in the past. Is like, what are you gonna do with all that money? Why you work so hard? You're not gonna take it to you to the grave. What about that mindset? How do you break something like that?
Well, the first thing I ask
Or saying like money's not important.
Well, the money not important is, what are you going to do when you retire? What are you going to do if you're sick for 2 months? How are you going to pay your bills? How are you going to put food on the table? Do you have an emergency fund? Do you have a retirement plan? And if you're happy with that, then maybe you don't take the next raise and you don't take the stressful job because it's not what you care about. You'd rather just sit at the beach and go fishing. But there are certain things that you have to take care of. You have to know that, God forbid, if you break your leg and can't work for 4 months, how are you going to pay rent and put food on the table? The amount of money that the state gives you is half of what you were working on. Where are you going to make up the rest? Or if it lasts more than the state money runs out, what are you going to do? So money is their first purpose, is to make sure you can provide for things that happen, for the unexpected, and you're not going to work your whole life. Based on what industry you're in, most construction people end up having to retire at 55, as an example. Now, office workers, they probably can work to 70 if they have to. I know people working to 75. But you don't know at that age when health is going to come in. So how are you going to live? Do you want to go live in an SRO when you retire? Because that's all you can afford, and just cook on a hot plate?
Yeah, no, I think most people want to be in a position where they want to work, it's particularly we're talking about retirement age, because they want to, not because they have to. So it's very important, it sounds like, to get started sooner the better, so you can put yourself in the position, because maybe sometimes it's difficult for people to see that far out.
Well, here's a better one, and you've heard me say this before. How about if you want to have kids and you don't have kids yet? If you can't save before you have kids, how are you going to pay for your kids? How are you going to even just pay for diapers and formula, let alone be able to afford a babysitter once a month to get away from them?
Yeah, you're definitely going to need that.
Yeah, right.
A break.
Or you want to offer your kids sports. It's not cheap. And there are no real scholarships. You can be low income, and they're not going to say, okay, we'll take your 7-year-old. Now, maybe if you have a 15-year-old soccer star, they may say that. But you want to offer certain things to your children. If you can't save before they're there, I tell people you can't afford children.
Yeah, no, definitely having to very conscious about it. But what about if the child's already here? Like, what do you do then? Like, if we already have a child and I couldn't afford it then, and I'm struggling now, I'm a single mom, single dad, whatever you want to say, what do they do? How could this book benefit them and help them out?
Again, it's going back to the budget and figuring out where to find the money, how to do it. We look at the lady at In-N-Out. She wanted to buy her kids toys. She started doing recycling in her neighborhood. I guess that's a spare job. In today's world, maybe you would do DoorDash or Uber to earn the $100 extra you need, or Amazon delivery. I mean, you can go pick a 2-hour shift and make money on Amazon delivery. So if you really are that tight because you're a single parent in a low-income job, you find out where to pick up the extra money, how to do it. You form a co-op for babysitting. You watch your neighbor's kid on Tuesday night while they go out and do something, and they watch your kids on Wednesday night, and you can go out and work 4 hours that night. So, I mean, if you can't cut your budget, you figure out how to add money to it. And today, it's a lot easier than 20 and 30 years ago, because there are all these opportunities like Amazon delivery, DoorDash, or a lot of other part-time gigs that are totally flexible.
Yeah, you're pretty much an independent contractor. You can work your hours as you can.
Yes.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of side gig economy. The economy has changed. What about those individuals that they say, I don't tend to invest in call it the stock market or the 401k because the market's always going down. Or look, it's down. I believe it's down right now, if I'm not mistaken.
It's really down. But it was down last year. So 2 years ago, the 10-year market was up 10.5%. With the last 2 years, 10 years, it's still up 9% if you look at the S&P 500. So money in the market is not for tomorrow. It's not where you save for your house in 3 years. You save for your house in 3 years in a safer investment, in a bank account, in a CD, or something like that. It's for the long term. And that's why they talk about, as you get closer to retirement or your long-term goal, you don't wait till that day to take the money out. You start taking out what you're going to need for 2 or 3 years and put it in something safer. It's the same thing with a 529 plan. It's all in stocks while your kid is little. When your kid turns 16 or 17, you put 1 year's tuition in the money market account, because you don't want to have to pay tuition out of your 529 stock account in December well, it wasn't December, it was August, when the market was totally down, when I had to pull 529 out. But I had the next month's tuition in money market, so I slowly move it in. So your investments are not for today. They're for the future. They're for your retirement. They're for paying for your kids' college. They're for your dream of getting a fancy truck in 10 years. One of my son's friends, the welder, he wants his $50,000 truck. He knows it's 10 years away at the rate he can afford to save. So he is saving in the stock market right now. He is putting it into just the S&P 500 and letting it ride. He's putting in $50 a month. He figures if he's lucky, he'll get the truck earlier. He knows when it gets to about 30, 35,000, he's pulling it out, and the rest he'll do on his own and wait the year or two. But he's hoping over the long term, and he's putting it in now, that he'll be able to buy that truck sooner rather than later by putting it in the stock market. And he's comfortable at 22 doing that because he started his Roth IRA at 16, and he learned with $25 a month. So don't go out and put all your money in the market in one day. Put a little bit in, put your toe in, and it doesn't matter how much money you have. It really doesn't. I would never recommend even somebody who never invested and sold a business to take and put all their money in at once. I'd invest that they learn and get used to it and figure out what they're comfortable with.
Yeah, maybe they can take a dollar cost average approach to it.
Right.
But two things. One that you mentioned through the conversation is I believe that's really important for people to be able to identify. There's a difference between wages and investments. So the stuff that we do on a day-to-day and you get paid for, that's your job, and you earn wages. Yes, that's for your day-to-day expenses. That's for your immediate expenses, and where your investments are more for the future. I think that's a perfect way of saying that.
Right, and it's even like we're even talking about an emergency fund. An emergency fund should not be in your investments. I happen to personally like, once you have a decent emergency fund, to put it in I-bonds because they're guaranteed. The downside of it is you have the 1 year late, so I tell people to put it in very slowly. But it's a guaranteed investment. It'll never go down. You'll always earn some interest on it. That's where mine is. I had bought I-bonds 20 years ago, and that's my emergency fund. So I'm talking about what I do also. Even though I do investments, it's not where I want my emergency money, because I want to be able to take it out the day I need it, not say, oh my God, there was a crash because something happened today. Even like 9/11, you don't know it's going to happen. You don't want to have to take it out the next day.
Talk to me a little bit about index, because you mentioned the S&P. So a lot of times people may not know what to invest. So first you get past the phase of like, okay, I'm going to invest now. I'm going to put X percentage. But now I don't know what to invest in. What are the benefits of an index or anything else that you...
So I believe unless you are really, really into stocks, you don't want to invest in an individual stock, except maybe as a little bit of fun or playing because you really believe in a company like Rivian that's starting out and it's not profitable and it's at $29, so you're going to buy a share and see what happens. So I'm a big believer there are three main indexes in the U.S. stock market: the Dow Jones Industrial, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ. They're slightly different. The Dow Jones is like it is the really big industrial brick and mortar companies, the Honeywells of the world. The S&P 500 is the 500 biggest capitalization companies. So it includes, and then the NASDAQ are the high-tech companies. Now you can have a company in all three indexes, like, for example, Apple, or in two indexes, like Tesla. But most of the companies are only in one. So you're buying a very big basket of companies. So if one company does something stupid, and even if they go bankrupt, it's 1/500th of the index. And so we talk in the book, it's called exchange traded funds, which are a block of indexes. And we talk about the S&P 500, and there are a couple of different symbols. SPY is the symbol. The NASDAQ, which is known as QQQ. The Dow Jones Industrial, which is DIA. And also, if you have a passion and you believe in something, there are more tailored exchange-traded funds where you don't have to pick the best stock. So a lot of young people believe in clean energy. There are 2 or 3 exchange-traded funds that are made up of 30, 50, or 100 clean energy firms. You can pick just wind power firms. So you can put a little bit of money to diversify. And again, you're picking a basket of funds, so you don't have to have a financial education and be able to go look at a balance sheet and all of the information about a company. You're listening to and learning on where you think the sector is going to grow. The clean energy has done very well with the new Inflation Reduction Act because they're putting a lot of money into that segment. So you hear this and you say, those companies are going to do good next year. And maybe that's your feeling. Maybe you feel clean energy is not a way to go because look what happened in California. They told us not to charge our electric vehicles for 2 weeks because we had a heat wave. And so maybe there really isn't the way to go. I'm not endorsing one thing. I'm telling you that if you have a passion or you believe in a sector of the economy, you can take a little bit of your investment and invest in that sector instead of picking a stock, like a specific stock. And I don't really know the names of the clean energy companies, so I can't give you an example of one company versus all of them because...
Well, in the sense, it sounds like if you go with an index, whether you're choosing either one of these, you're kind of betting on the U.S. economy.
Yes. You can also not bet on the U.S. economy. I found a index that's very interesting about 4 months ago, and it's Freedom, FRDM. And it is to give you diversification, because I want to have 10% outside of the U.S., right? And they do something different than any other fund. They only invest in development countries that have a good civil rights feeling. So they don't invest in any of like Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, areas of the world that...
They never invested in Russia. They never invested in China. So they aren't as affected by, those are the countries that we sometimes blockade.
Yeah.
And so you can pick a single country. If you believe in India for some reason, or Mexico, or Brazil, you can pick that, but now you're taking a much higher risk.
Yeah.
But if you do it with 2% of your money, it's okay. And so, the rule of thumb is that having 10% international is not a bad thing to have.
Yeah, you probably get a good return on emerging markets. They have a higher potential, I imagine, of having a bigger risk, as you mentioned.
Right.
But then most of the conversation that we've been having has been about, stocks and 401ks because I gravitate towards this because I try to pick your brain as much as I can and just caught myself. But these books that you've written, they're pretty much all over different things that they can impact. So, for example, the individual that is trying to buy a car, not even 401k, how could this book help them to plan to buy a car?
Well, it talks about how to find room in your budget so that you can save the money for your car. And then we have a story about buying cars in all of our books. And it says, when you buy the first car, maybe you only have 5% down. But you can buy a 10-year warranty on a car. Your loans are 5 years. Your payment is $300, right? So you pay it off in 5 years. You keep that car with that warranty for 10 years. You pay that $300 into a special savings account that you call CAR. And you just put it in that savings account. And all of a sudden, when you go to buy the next car, you can either afford a better car, or you can buy the same class of car, and now you can pay the loan off in 2 years. So the third time around, maybe you have no loan. Or maybe you want to get a better car. You have a family. Now you need to go from the little car to a van. Well, with having a much bigger down payment, you now can afford that van on that same $300 a month payment.
Yeah, I think a mistake a lot of people do is they go in, they want to buy a car, and salesmen, they're trained for this. So therefore, the first thing they ask you is, how much could you afford, or how much you want to pay a month? And then they reverse engineer it, and without realizing that your interest rate's probably going to be higher than what it should be.
Right. The higher your payment is, the lower your down payment, the higher the interest rate. And the bigger mistake they do, and I know a lot of young people that do this, we can get you this lease at $300 a month. But you know what happens at the end of that 5-year lease? You have nothing. If you can't afford to buy another car, you're out of luck. Whereas at the end of your 5-year loan, you have a car that's worth something. And if you spend the little extra money and buy that 10-year warranty, you have a car that you know isn't going to cost you anything but gas, oil, and tires for 10 years. And I consider insurance a very important thing for people to have. And I consider a warranty insurance that the car will last you for 10 years.
No, that would definitely help. What about in buying a house?
It's the same thing. The first key is to find the room in the budget to save for the house, to decide you want to make a sacrifice. And you have to make a sacrifice. I had a client who was a high-paid programmer who came to me and said, I need help buying a house. So we did the 30 days of expenses. I found out he ate 21 meals a week out. He didn't know how to cook. I told him, I want you to go to Whole Foods. I didn't tell him to learn to cook, because you're a vegetarian. I want you to buy the pre-made breakfasts, and I want you to buy either half the lunches or half the dinners that you can just put in the microwave. That will save you $700 a month. He was spending a lot of money on food. He said, a house isn't that important to me. I want to eat out every day. So obviously a house wasn't important to him. So you have to this will show you how to find a budget to save. And it'll show you how to track your budget every month. And you realize that after a while, you'll realize in your head, oh my God, it was really hot. The electric bill is going to be double next month. I better not eat out this month or I won't make my budget. That will take you 3 or 4 or 6 months of budgeting until you start anticipating it and you learn to naturally keep the budget in balance by when something big happens, having a balance for something else, or knowing that you have to budget for it. I have a story in my women's book about a retired grandma. She stayed on budget, but she realized in the summer she went out of budget because her grandkids were away, out of school, and she did things with them. She then changed her budget and gave up some of her discretionary for 9 months out of the year and created a savings account to pay for the extra money that she wanted to spend on her grandkids so she could take them for the day and go out to lunch 2-3 days a week, because that was more important to her than some of the other things she chose to do. So there's always ways, and sometimes, so she had a way to have extra money in the summer when the kids were home.
Well, she had to make a sacrifice. She figured it out.
Right, she made a sacrifice. She did not take every invitation from her friends to go to lunch anymore. She knew that her grandkids were more important to her.
Having those priorities straight. So I know we have a series of books that are here. Maybe we can talk about them. So which book is for what and who is it guided or geared towards? So maybe we can start with this one first. I guess maybe the name gives it right there, gives it out, is Financially Independent Teens.
So that is a really unique book. It is aimed for a parent or a teen. We recommend if the parent wants to take the time to read it first. And for some of the teens, they can just read the stories or they can pick and choose what they want. But it has exercises that are relevant to both of them. It goes into a lot of depth on what to do after high school. And we do not limit this to going to college. We are firm believers that every child needs to find their right destiny. We have talk about how to find the right vocational school. And we have sites that show you what the community colleges offer in the way of vocational or career training. And we go into depth on college financial aid and how to really figure out what college costs. Because one of the big fallacies is that, I'm going to say San Diego State is cheaper than the other school. But in certain majors, it takes you 5 years to get out of San Diego State, not 4. If you can get out of the other school in 4 years, which is really cheaper with the financial aid you get. And people forget that. You need to know how long it takes to get out based on where and what you think you're doing. you know, and things may change. So on schools' websites, you can find out how long the average student is at a school. And we talk about that. And those are things that you want to get your teens involved in. You want them to understand. Do you want to spend 5.5 years in college, or do you want to spend 4? So maybe your dream school isn't what you want. And so it talks the teen on budget. It gets very much into establishing credit when your child turns 16, so that at 19, if they are away at college or want their own apartment, they can get it. Because without a credit score, you're not going to rent an apartment. And a lot of cities don't allow your parents to open utilities for you. They require the person living in the house to be on the utility. That's how my son beat out 10 people during COVID on the house that's a block away from college. He was the first person that had a credit score over 600 that applied.
What are little things that people can do to improve their credit score?
Pay your credit card off every week. It's amazing how much your credit score goes up by paying it off every week. It's also something we recommend the first 3 years you have a credit card so you don't get in trouble. But if you pay it to zero and you're running $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month, and you pay it every week, you've now dropped your credit utilization enough to boost your score by 5 to 25 points.
Wow.
And the more you are spending, the more it will help you. I have people that had lots of credit and had never paid interest that were looking for a home, and they started paying it off at least weekly, and they got 40, 50, 60 point drop boosts in your credit score. So especially if you're going to go buy a car and you have a loan or something, 3 months before, start paying it off every week. I have one person who pays it off every time she uses it because she got in trouble once and she doesn't want to get in trouble again, but she wants her points. She wants the rewards. So she goes home every night. If she uses her credit card, she just pays it from her phone.
I tell people is like, be aware of it. We all have one, whether you realize it or not. Is be aware of it, and therefore you can start managing from there.
Well, do you tell them about Credit Karma? It's free. It sends you an alert every time your credit score goes up or down. It also is really good. So if somebody steals your identity, you get an email that says, "Did you open this account?"
Yeah, and as we all know that identity theft has been on the rise, particularly this last decade. It's probably only going to get worse, I think.
Yes.
So we definitely want to be on top of that. Now, going to your other book that you have here, Raising Financially Independent Children.
That is a book aimed at parents. It's aimed at parents. Whether your child's 2 to 20 years old, it has examples and stories on how to accomplish a lot of goals. It goes into allowance, it goes into delayed gratification, it has learning by examples. So it has stories for kids of all different ages, it has stories on how to help them, teach them whatever you value to teach them. Again, my values are not your values. We raised our children differently. They both can be very successful children, but we raised them with values that are important to us. You know, for you, it was responsibility. For me, it was not wasting money, was my first thing. And my second thing was grades. I paid for grades because I always said school is your work. And I didn't give allowance. I paid for grades. And I had extra chores in the house for extra money. You may say, you get your allowance if you take care of everything you're supposed to do this week. And it's all or nothing. Somebody else may have another formula that's important for them to teach the child the value they believe in.
Nice. Your other book is what? Financial Independent Essentials.
Right.
Independence Essentials.
So that was written for the person that wanted a reference book, wanted the information, and really didn't want the stories. Believe it or not, about 20% of our audience said, I don't want to read through the stories. I just want to know how to do a budget. I just want to know what an investment is. I don't want to hear about how somebody paid off their car. I just want to learn the basics. I really need to learn how to budget. That's the book for that. And then we have 2 more books aimed at couples and the book coming out this week that's aimed at women.
Yeah, one that's coming out Today or this week, you mentioned?
Today. We hit the publish button last night on Amazon.
And which one is that one?
That's Financial Essentials for Women by Women. And it is our most in-depth book because we found that a lot of women need more scam awareness. So we go into topics like how to avoid scams, especially like things like romance scams, which are typically women. And we go into how to protect, and it's kind of out of how to protect your money. And that includes something that we find women have a hard time doing is saying no. Your friend wants to borrow $5,000. Maybe you can't afford to lose it. And the probability of getting it back, you don't know. Your kid keeps on borrowing money at age 40 from you. What do you do? How do you deal with this? So it goes into issues of what do you do if you're in a relationship where your husband says, I'm paying the bills. You have to say, well, you got to start teaching me. You can watch me, but I need to learn. What happens if you're sick for a month? How do the bills get paid? So it goes into a lot of situations that are very unique to women.
No, it makes a lot of sense to be able to put it out there and people can get educated. I think that's the big thing is getting educated where they can do something about it.
Right, and a lot of women feel they don't know anything, so if they see a book written for women, I think they'll feel more comfortable reading it. But there's as many men out there that don't know anything about finance.
Yeah. And then the other book that you mentioned, which one is that one?
The Financial Essentials for Couples, the one we talked about.
Okay, that's the one I need.
Yeah.
That's the one I'm at so that's already out.
That's been out for a while.
Okay. So I'm going to check that one out. And out of all these books, which one has been the most fun to write? More gratifying, I guess, if you want to say that.
Raising Financially Independent Children. We wrote it during COVID, but my dream for 15 years to write it, but I'm going to be very honest. My grammar is not very good. I am not a very good writer. And Irene and I had the same vision, and she's a phenomenal writer. And she finds every tense right and everything else. And so we've made a wonderful team in that I'm willing to go out and interview people for stories. She does the technical writing. I'm willing to come do the podcasts. She does the technical writing.
But you guys, work as a team, so that's the big thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. And where can people find these books?
They're on Amazon.
So everything's on Amazon?
Everything's on Amazon. You can Google the name. You can look at Nancy Burgandine. And once you find one, they're on a series. They're all linked together.
And how can people find you? You mentioned, Amazon, but how can they find you in particular if they want to get more information about you?
So we have a website, and it's long and complicated.
Well, we can probably share the links as well, so we don't have to spell it out. So
afterwards, and you can spell it out.
Yeah.
We have a website. We have a blog on that. We have an email address that you can email questions to, and that's not long and complicated.
Which one is that?
Parents, PARTENSFIN @gmail.com.
Okay. Sounds good.
If you need a link or anything else, we can always send you that. And we're not willing to go into a lot of specific advice, but general questions we answer by email.
Oh, good. Well, we'll make sure all that content is going to be pretty much part of the links that when we publish this podcast. But Nancy, I want to thank you for coming. This is something that I've been wanting to do for a while, so I'm glad we're finally able to connect. I know you're pretty busy with the move and whatnot, and I get pretty busy myself, so thank you so much. I know that our listeners are going to get a lot out of this. I said it earlier that you guys are going to leave a lot smarter after this podcast, and I guarantee you that you guys did. So thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Carlos.